Hi guys, my name is Sophie Farrow. I will be doing my issue 4 project on the use of fire as a tool to reclaim prairie grazing lands. So to start out, I'm just going to go over what the eastern red cedar tree is. It's a native cedar tree species that is found in states like Oklahoma and North Texas, but has become a bit of an endemic in areas like Nebraska, specifically prairie lands and grasslands. And this is because it becomes highly invasive with the ability to form dense tree cover that removes sunlight and nutrients from native grasses. And cedar growths, specifically red cedar growths, can utilize up to 40 liters of water a day, resulting in additional ecological strain on non-native habitats, especially in drought regions like Nebraska. Cedars are extremely unpalatable for grazing cattle, which then causes overgrazing in areas where growth is not present and decreasing grazable pasture land. So the USDA WLFW, it's like the Wildlife Protection Agency, estimated in the year 2020 alone, Nebraska farmers lost over 530,000 tons of forage due to red cedar growth. So one methodology of controlling the growth of red cedar trees has actually been found to be prescribed burns. This is also coined as controlled burnings, but just essentially a method of invasive species control that is highly effective in reducing cedar growth and regrowth. These prescribed burns maintain native tree species that regulate in wet, rocky areas, as well as allowing regrowth of prairie grass species whose seeds withstand the high temperature climate of a wildfire. So essentially preserves plants and animals and natural habitat that is native to the area, but then destroys anything that's invasive. So as I said previously, it destroys live sprouting and seeded cultivations of plants unacclimated for burn climate. This includes the red cedar, which denatures under high heat conditions. And prescribed burnings emulate natural burn cycles that occurred prior to European agricultural development. So essentially, how we control cows right now, which contributed to sustained soil fertility, fuel maintenance, and assisted in proper decomposition of organic material. So prior to European settlement, a lot of Native American groups, as well as just like the natural ecological cycle, produced burns that ultimately controlled sort of like the natural decomposition cycle, which essentially is what can be emulated in prescribed burnings. So reconstruction of grazing land when using controlled or prescribed burnings. So according to a study by UNL or University of Nebraska Lincoln, prescribed burns in a prairie land can reduce tree cover from 50% to 10% after just 2 cycles of yearly burns. Another group called the Loess Canyons Rangeland Alliance. This is located in Nebraska and works a lot with farmers and ranchers specifically. Safely restored 85,000 acres of grazing land in 2008 with a near 90% reduction in red cedar growth in Nebraska and surrounding areas. This data implies burns are far more effective in reducing invasive plant species than other methodologies like tree cutting or use of herbicides. Um, with any sort of like environmental control methodology, there's always going to be varying perspectives, specifically between agriculturalists and then the general public. And overall, this methodology is primarily scrutinized by non-agricultural groups due to the possibility of public health hazards. So this includes smoke inhalation, cancerous burn debris, increased risk of COPD or other respiratory diseases in surrounding residential areas that might be affected by a burn. Burns also risk escape into separate agricultural zones or residential areas. These are actually all photos of California burnings that actually resulted from nearby controlled burns that were essentially done in potentially hazardous weather conditions. Um, and then controlled burns require a substantial amount of water usage, which again is not going to be good in areas that are in extreme drought. And method is also completely dependent on weather conditions. As said before, you can't do it in too dry conditions. You actually can't do it in wet conditions either. So it's not always a reliable methodology. And then overconcentration of soil nutrients following burnings may contribute to eutrophication or reduction of long-term soil fertility. And the temporary removal of habitat for wildlife is also a major issue, especially for animal activists. My personal perspective is that the use of controlled burns replicate natural prairie and grassland cycles that have been heavily modified by European agricultural settlement. The historical data implies burning is far more effective in reducing invasive plant species growth in critical pasture land, and in order to sustain grass-fed beef operations, burning may be the only highly efficient means of doing so. Further method development will ultimately reduce any downfalls mentioned before of burning procedures. In conclusion, prescribed burning is an effective method of reducing the presence of red cedar growth, which benefits the beef industry through the reduction of unpalatable plant species and forage grasses. Burn cycles are a normal aspect of prairie and grassland climate, provides alternative protection for other native grassland species and soil sustainability, so aside from beef production, and is relatively controversial and will require further development in order to reduce risk to public health and other wildlife or agricultural zones. And thanks for watching.